I think one of my favorite of your guys' interviews was John Oates and Daryl Hall. I love Hall and Oates. They were discussing Maneater. And then also David Page from Toto talking about Africa. But I'd love to know, who some of your favorite interviews were and anything that came out of those interviews that was a little bit surprising to you.
Those two definitely, David Page and John Oates were huge episodes for me. I say it so much on the show that our memories are what are attached to songs. And the longer the time goes, okay, so Africa and Maneater were right around the same time in the early 80s. So I had a lot of years and a lot of memories. Those are my young years growing up. So talking to both those guys was just insane. Something crazy that came out of the Toto episode was, I will listen to these songs in headphones very intently. And unlike I've ever listened to them before, I've heard Africa probably thousands of times, airport radios, restaurants, wherever, just in everyday life. But I was listening in headphones. I had it cranked up, and before the drum start, like the bongos and the drums start at the top of the song Africa, I heard this laugh off into the left speaker. And it was a laugh. Yeah, Chris? A laugh? Or a cough? It was a laugh. It was a laugh.
It was a laugh.
Yeah. And that was the first thing I said to David. I said, there's a laugh off. He said, what? He's like, wow, that's got to be Jeff. And Jeff Porcaro, their drummer, sadly passed away in the early 90s. But next thing you know, we got the manager, publicist writing us saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's Jeff's laugh at the top. This is a song that's 40 years old. It was like their drummer kind of came back for a second there. Next thing I know, the manager says that I just talked to Steve Lukather, the guitar player, and he said the same thing. So they all kind of had a moment, and it was something I found 40 years later. That was really cool.
Well, also, Chris, I want to mention too that we had Huey Lewis on the show. And I loved when he came on and he talked about the power of love. And I really loved when you brought up to him, hey, there's no harmonies. You guys are known for harmonies, but there's like no harmonies through this entire song until the very end. And he went, you know what? You're right. I never thought about that before. And for a band, Huey Lewis and the News being known so much for their harmonies, the fact that you pointed that out and he was like, I never thought about that before. That was a real highlight of our show for me.
Love those answers, you guys. Thank you. Those are gems. Thank you so much. Okay, and I know you have friends in high places, that's no disrespect, but how are you guys landing these interviews? Like, what can our podcaster listeners take with them of how to contact these people and how to make their show, attractive for these guests?
Chris and I have taken a crash course in Poor Man's Publicity 101 the last 3 years. Chris just cold emails people. We find email addresses. Some of them get returned and sent back. Some of them are old email addresses. Some of them are the publicist. It's not actually the band. Some of them is the artist. You're like, I can't believe the guy wrote me back 3 minutes after I emailed them. We're all different.
Yeah,
I'm one of those people. If a fan writes me, I'll write him back, immediately.
Noted.
If it's something, if it's something within reason, right? But that's I don't know, that's something that sticks out to me. It's really cool.
Well, I got to give Chris a little bit of credit on this too, because when we were first starting the podcast out, part of it is getting your back catalog together to be able to present to somebody like, hey, we've had this guest, we've had this guest, we've had this guest, plus the numbers that come from having good guests and making a good show, of course. But I think that, I don't want to sell short the fact that Chris being in a legendary punk rock band helped us land a lot of guests along the way.
That would help. Yes, for sure.
Yes, early on. But yes, it's a lot of cold emails. It's a lot of talking to publicists. It's a lot of rejection. I would say that, 8 out of 10 people we go after, it's rejection. And sometimes I've learned a lot of valuable lessons from my friend Chris here. Staying on people. If you get a maybe, it's hit them up again, hit them up again. We've had a few guests, Chris, where it must have took us 10 reaching outs to finally they gave up and they're like, okay, we'll do it. Or, I hate to put it that way, but sometimes you just got to stick with people and remind them. People have a lot of stuff going on, especially if it's a big artist and it's their management or their publicist. They have a lot of fish to fry, and you want to stay at the top of their mind. So persistence is something I've learned from this podcast too. And Chris has really helped me get a little more persistent in these days. So yeah.
And I'll tell you, the artists that have been around 30 or 40 years, they've been around that long for a reason. Okay. It's not just the fame, the fortune, the money that keeps them there. There's got to be a passion, but they got to still want to do it. And they're not jaded and they're not jerks. Most of them that I've met. So Huey Lewis, great. He's an old timer, been doing it forever. I'm nervous the whole morning on eggshells walking around. And then you'll get a newer artist that, hasn't sold that many records. They're kind of new, and you put them on and there's list of demands from their publicist and all this stuff. And you're sitting there going, oh
my goodness. That would be so hard. I mean, are you intimidated by some of these guests? What do you do about that?
Yeah, I'm starstruck sometimes. I'm not intimidated by demands and those types of things from younger artists, because I've seen them all in the last 30 years come and go, and of all different types of demeanors. And at the end of the day, you have to treat people in this business like anything else in life, how you want to be treated.